Night Through the Black Portals. Chapter 1. The Bell at Ash Hollow. The first time Sir Aldren Vale heard the bell, it was ringing beneath the earth. He stood in the rain outside the ruined chapel of Ash Hollow, with one gauntleted hand resting on the hilt of his sword, listening as thunder rolled over the moors. The chapel had not held worship in years. Its roof had collapsed inward. Its stone saints had lost their faces to weather and vandal hands. The village around it was half empty, with doors barred before sunset and windows darkened by more than night. Men had vanished from Ash Hollow over the last 3 months. 2 children, a priest, a hunter who had sworn he'd seen red lights among the standing stones and had gone back with a spear to prove he feared nothing. He had not returned. Aldren had come because others would not. That was the sort of thing people said about him, though never to his face if they could help it. He was not famous. He did not want to be. He was simply the man who kept walking toward what other men kept backing away from. He was broad-shouldered, scarred, practical to the point of bluntness, and old enough to know that courage was not a feeling. Courage was a habit. It was a set of choices made one after another, while fear gnawed the ribs from the inside. The rain tapped on his pauldrons. Then the bell rang again. Not from the chapel tower. From below. Aldren lifted the lantern he had taken from the Reeves' house. Its weak yellow light shivered across broken stone, rotted pews, and a floor cracked open by age. Beneath the altar there was an opening he had not noticed from outside, a black throat in the earth where square-cut steps disappeared downward. The air rising from it smelled old and wrong, like wet ash and fresh blood trying to hide under incense. He drew his sword. The blade was plain, workmanlike, sharpened that morning on a wheel behind a smithy 40 miles away. The edge had no name. The weapon had no legend. He preferred it that way. A sword was for cutting. Men who decorated them too much usually did not use them enough. He descended into the dark. The stair bent twice, then opened into a crypt far larger than the chapel above had any right to possess. Vaulted ceilings vanished into shadow. Pillars carved with kneeling angels lined a chamber whose floor was graven with a circle of sigils. 12 stone coffins stood around that circle, and in the center hung the bell. It did not hang from rope or chain. It floated. Black iron cracked through with red light, turning slowly in the air as if submerged in invisible water. At its base knelt Father Merrow, or what had once been Father Merrow. His robes were split down the back. Something had forced itself through him from within, stretching skin and cloth alike until neither remained whole. He rose on limbs too long for any man, and where his face should have been, there was a wet lattice of teeth, opening and closing around a hole that glowed like the inside of a furnace. Aldren did not waste breath on prayer. He lunged first. The thing sprang faster than a wolf. It struck a pillar hard enough to crack stone where he had stood a moment earlier. Aldren pivoted, felt claws rake sparks from his breastplate, then drove his blade under its arm and up through ribs that snapped like green wood. Hot black blood splashed his vambrace. The creature screamed without lungs and tore itself free. It came at him low. He gave ground 1 step, then another, measuring the reach, the rhythm. Practical. Always practical. Every beast, every man, every horror had a way it moved, when it thought it had the advantage. On the third rush, he let it close, and cut its leg off at the knee. It toppled, shrieking. He pinned its shoulder under his boot, and severed the head. The body convulsed. The crypt fell still. Only the bell remained, turning slowly in its circle of red-lit runes. Aldren looked at it for a long moment. Then he heard whispering. Not in the chamber, inside his own skull. "Open!" He set his jaw and stepped back. The red lines in the floor brightened. Open! The coffins surrounding the circle trembled. Lids slid aside. Thin hands dragged themselves over stone. Aldren swore under his breath. He had time for one decision: flee up the stairs and pray the thing stayed buried, or break whatever this was before it reached the village. He stepped into the circle. The bell gave a single, soundless peal. The world broke. There was no falling, no sense of motion, only a violent unmaking. The crypt stretched into 1,000 strips of red and black. The floor vanished. The air became cold enough to bite bone. For one impossible instant Aldren saw vastness. Towering silhouettes beyond stars, roads made of light, worlds like burning eyes connected by spinning gates. Then he hit stone, hard enough to spit blood into his gorget. He rolled, came up on one knee with sword in hand, and stared. He was no longer beneath the chapel. He knelt in a plain of black glass beneath a sky that churned with green storms. Dead towers rose at impossible angles in every direction, miles high and broken, as if some giant hand had snapped them and left the pieces standing. Rivers of pale fire ran between them. In the distance he heard screams, not of panic or battle, but of endless labor. A gate of red light stood behind him for half a heartbeat. He lunged for it. It closed. Only darkness remained. The wind moved over the glass plain with a whisper like laughter. Aldren slowly rose to his feet. No horse, no road, no chapel, no home. Just the sword in his hand, the armor on his back, and a world that smelled of sulphur and graves. He looked toward the nearest broken tower and began to walk, because that was what there was to do. Chapter 2: The City of the Chained Dead. He found the first people before dawn, though in that place dawn was more a thinning of darkness than any honest sunrise. They were hauling stones. Hundreds of them, chained neck to neck in lines that stretched between crumbling archways and a vast half-built wall. Men, women, even children old enough to walk beneath the weight of burdens that should have broken them. Their eyes were gray with exhaustion. Their skin held a waxy pallor, as though the land itself had been drinking them slowly from the inside. Over them stalked the overseers. The overseers wore bronze masks fused to flesh. Their backs were bent beneath frames of iron hooks from which hung bells, cages, and flensing knives. They carried staffs tipped with hooked blades that flared with white fire whenever they struck the chains. Aldren crouched behind a ridge of black stone and watched in silence. A rational man, he told himself, would keep walking. One night in a dead land could not save a city of strangers. A practical man would learn the rules before challenging whatever evil governed this place. Then one of the overseers dragged a girl from the line and raised its blade because she had stumbled. Aldren stood. He crossed the last 30 paces at a sprint. The first overseer turned at the clang of his sabatons and got its masked face split from brow to chin before it could cry out. Sparks and clots of dark matter sprayed from within the bronze. The second swung its staff. Aldren caught the haft under his arm, closed the distance, and drove his dagger through the slit beneath the mask. The laborers froze. Then the bells on the third overseer's back began to ring. There were 6 of them now, emerging from the dark mouth of a gatehouse in the wall. More followed behind. Aldren tore the hooked staff from the corpse at his feet and flung it, skewering the nearest creature through the throat. Then he moved. The fight became noise, and heat, and iron. He was not the strongest thing in that field, not by far, but he was efficient. He never swung twice where one thrust would do. He never stepped farther than needed. He used broken chains to trip one foe, a falling corpse, to shield from another's fire, a shattered wheelbarrow to choke the bottleneck at the gate. One bell-headed overseer opened his side with a hook that punched through mail and bit into muscle. Aldren ignored the pain, seized the thing by the mask, and head-butted it with enough force to cave bronze inward. Another nearly hamstrung him before a laborer drove a stone hammer into its knee. That broke whatever spell held the rest. The chained dead surged, not bravely, not cleanly. Desperation rarely looked noble. They fought with rocks, timbers, bare teeth, and the hunger of people who had run out of room inside themselves for terror. Within minutes, the last overseer lay in pieces under a dozen trampling feet. No one cheered. They only stared at Aldren as if unsure whether he were a savior, a fool, or another sort of monster they had not yet learned to fear. An old woman stepped forward at last. Her wrists were raw from iron. Half her hair had gone white, half black, divided sharply down the center, like frost had taken only one side of her. "You are not from the fallow realm," she said. Aldren wiped his sword on a fallen chain rag and sheathed it. No. That much was plain. Her voice was dry as old paper. No one born here attacks a bellmaster in daylight. It seemed the right time. For the first time, something like dark amusement touched her face. Then perhaps you are exactly the kind of fool we need. Her name was Mara. She led what remained of the laborers through the ruined gate and into the city beyond. The city of the chained dead had once been magnificent. Aldren could see that even through the rot. Bridges of white stone spanned avenues lined with statues 50 feet high. Towers shaped like candles rose from plazas sunk with graves. But all of it had been corrupted into a machine of suffering. The white stone was veined with black. The statues wept tar. Chains hung between rooftops, cages swung from every arch, and at the city's heart stood a spire wound in iron rings, around which burned 7 portal gates like captive suns. Aldren stopped in the street. He said. Mara followed his gaze. The ways. They go to other worlds. So the bell masters say. She studied him sidelong. You know what portals are? I know I came through something like one. That means the Black Sovereign has marked you. He looked at her. Who? All around them, the freed laborers had gone still at the name. Mara spoke softly. The one who rules the realms between realms, the keeper of the ways, the eater of kings. Different worlds call him different things. Here we call him the Black Sovereign, because names have power, and we have no wish to give him more. Aldren had heard many stories in his life. Demons under mountains, witches in wells, queens who wore men's hearts around their throats. Most hid some smaller truth beneath fear's embroidery. This did not feel smaller. "Can those gates send me home?" he asked. "Perhaps. Perhaps. Only the bell masters and their lords open them safely. Others who try are cut apart in transit, or worse. And even if you could travel the ways, who says your world still waits where you left it?" Aldren said nothing. Mara nodded, as though she had expected that reaction. "Come, you are bleeding, and if the bells go silent too long, the city's higher masters will come looking." They sheltered beneath a collapsed observatory, where a hidden camp had formed among cracked mosaics and shattered lenses. There were perhaps 60 survivors left in hiding. They gave Aldren water that tasted of copper and stitched his wound by lantern light, while Mara explained the shape of his prison. The fallow realm was only one of many. There was the ember wastes, where armies burned forever. The mire of saints, where drowned gods whispered from beneath black water. The glass kingdom, where memory could be stolen and sold. All were linked by the ways. Portals bound to towers, bells, altars, and wounds in the fabric of reality itself. And above them all, beyond the ordinary march of days, was the throne between, seat of the Black Sovereign. No one left the realms once taken, or almost no one. There were others, Aldren asked. Mara hesitated. Stories. A swordswoman from the dawn reaches, who crossed 3 worlds, and nearly reached the 7th gate. A hunter from the hollow steppe, who slew a gate lord and vanished. Most think them lies. And you? I think lies do not make tyrants nervous. That night, Aldren lay awake on broken tiles, under a collapsed dome, through which the false stars of the fallow realm stared coldly down. He thought of Ash Hollow, of the rain, of the ordinary ache of a saddle after a long road, of a life that had felt plain enough when he was living it. He understood, perhaps for the first time, how precious plain things were. He also understood another truth. If the only road home ran through hell and worse places beyond, then hell would have to make room for him. Chapter 3. The Bell Master of Fallow. The city answered the missing overseers before noon the next day. The bells began first. Every tower, every chain arch, every hanging cage in the city started tolling with different rhythms, a madness of sound that made the teeth ache. The hidden camp erupted into motion. Mothers clutched children. Men grabbed spears fashioned from scavenged iron. Mara climbed a toppled pillar and listened with her eyes closed, as though reading words in the noise. "They know," she said. "Not everything. Enough." Aldren buckled his cuirass. The stitches in his side tugged hotly. "Where do they come from?" She pointed toward the iron-ringed spire at the city's center. "Then that's where we go." Several of the camp stared at him, as if he'd suggested walking into the sea. Mara's expression tightened. "You have courage. Good. Keep some in reserve for wisdom. If they control the gates, I need them. And if they control the city, they can bury us all before you reach the first stair." Aldren glanced around at the survivors. People who had spent years waiting under rubble to die a little later than the rest. "Then we stop hiding." That was the moment, he would later think, when the shape of his road truly set. Not when he had entered the crypt under Ash Hollow. Not when the Red Gate had flung him into a dead world. Here, among frightened strangers in a broken observatory, he chose a harder path than survival. He chose war. The plan was simple, because complicated plans belong to armies with supply carts and time. Aldren led a small strike through maintenance tunnels beneath the old city, while Mara roused sleeper cells among labor camps and grave pits. When the bells summoned the hunt inward, the city's hidden dead would rise behind them. "Simple plans fail too," said a scarred mason named Oren as they moved through a drain channel large enough to crouch in. "Yes," Aldren replied, "but at least you know why." Oren barked a laugh and passed him a sack of stolen charges, clay bulbs full of lamp oil, bone powder, and something sour Mara's people used for blasting locks. They reached the lower vaults of the spire by dusk. The iron rings surrounding the tower groaned above them like the breathing of some immense sleeper. Here the walls were no longer white stone, blackened by corruption, but polished black metal inlaid with living runes. The air smelled of incense, hot bronze, and old sorrow. In a chamber shaped like an inverted bell, they found the master of the realm. The Bell Master of Fallow was suspended over a pit on chains of light. Human once, perhaps. Now he was stretched into a tall, skeletal thing wrapped in layers of flayed parchment on which moved tiny writing that hurt the eyes to follow. A crown of 12 cracked bells floated around his skull. His hands ended in clappers of black bone. When he opened his eyes, they were full of spinning red gates. "I wondered what had broken the old pattern," he said, and his voice rang from every surface in the room. "A wanderer!" Aldren stepped into the chamber. "Open the gate!" The bell master smiled, with a mouth too narrow for its teeth. "Which one?" "The one that returns me." "There is no returning." "Then open the next." At this, the creature laughed. "You think linearly. That is a peasant habit. These worlds are not stairs, but wounds. They intersect, overlap, consume each other. Home is not a place you can simply point toward." "Then I'll kill you until someone smarter explains it." The bell master's smile widened. "Good. That answer is why he wants you." The room darkened. Chains of light lashed from the pit. Aldren rolled under the first, severed a second, and felt a third wrap around his vambrace with numbing cold. Oren hurled 2 blasting bulbs into the suspended bells orbiting the creature's head. They detonated in yellow flame. 1 bell shattered. The bellmaster screamed, and every bell in the city screamed with him. Then the uprising began. The floor shook with distant impacts. Through vents and shafts came the sound of battle spreading through the streets. Mara had moved faster than fear. Aldren tore himself free of the chain, charged the pit, and leaped onto the narrow bridge of metal spanning it. The bellmaster descended to meet him, hands swinging like hammers. Their clash rang through the chamber. Aldren's arms numbed to the shoulder. The second blow dented his pauldron inward. The third missed only because he stepped inside the arc and drove his blade through a fold of parchment-wrapped ribs. Not deep enough. The creature seized him by the throat and lifted him clear off the bridge. Aldren saw the pit below, not darkness, but faces. Thousands of faces fused into the walls, mouths open, tolling soundlessly. He kicked hard against the bellmaster's chest, broke the grip for an instant, and slammed a dagger into one spinning gate-eye. Red light burst across the chamber. The master reeled. Aldren landed badly, nearly slid into the pit, caught the bridge with one hand, and hauled himself up as Oren drove a pick through another floating bell. "No!" Oren shouted. Aldren understood at once. Not the body. The bells. He moved with the ugly, efficient speed born of exhaustion. 1 slash, 1 thrust, 1 shoulder check, using the creature's own flailing against it. A bell cracked beneath his pommel. Another flew into the pit. Another he seized with his left hand, despite the heat burning through his glove, and smashed into the bridge rail until it burst. The bellmaster's form began to collapse inward, parchment unwrapping in furious spirals. "You do not understand," it shrieked. "If you sever this realm from the chain, the others will notice." "They already have," Aldren said, and cut the last bell from the air. The thing came apart in a storm of ash and metal. The iron rings around the spire groaned. Somewhere high above, a gate ignited. Mara appeared in the chamber with blood on one cheek and 3 rebels at her back. "The first way is open." Aldren stared up the shaft of the spire, where red light poured downward like a sunrise through a wound. He should have run for it. He should have taken the first chance offered and trusted fate for the rest. Instead, he looked through the vents in the chamber wall at the city beyond. Fires, fighting, people who had gambled everything on a stranger with a sword. "If I leave," he said, "what happens here?" Mara's face hardened. "If you stay, perhaps we live. If you go, perhaps you live." He hated choices like that. He had always hated them because they were not choices at all. Aldren drew a slow breath, picked up his sword, and turned away from the open gate. "Then we finish it." Mara studied him for half a second, then nodded once, as if confirming something she had suspected from the beginning. "Good," she said, "because the higher lords are already coming." Chapter 4. The Ember Wastes. The rebels held the city of the chained dead for 3 days. On the 4th, the sky tore open. Aldren watched the rift spread like fire across cloth above the spire. Through it descended a fortress made of chained ribs, cinders, and molten brass, the war bastion of Varkal, lord of the Ember Wastes. From its lower decks marched armies in ranks so disciplined they looked like the movement of one creature with 10,000 limbs. The fallow survivors had courage now, but courage was not enough against siege engines dragged by skinned giants and infantry whose shields bled flame. Mara found Aldren atop the west wall, where he was directing archers to target the beast-drawn engines rather than the armored ranks. "The first way remains open," she said, over the roar of incoming fire. "Take it! You can still leave before the tower falls." He did not answer immediately. A stone exploded nearby, showering them with shards and hot dust. Aldren handed a fresh bundle of arrows to the nearest archer, then turned. "If I go through that gate," he said, "does it lead home?" "No." "Does it lead closer?" Mara did not lie. "I do not know." He looked out over the city, the dead towers, the refugees below carrying water and spears, the children too young to understand what had begun following him, with eyes he wished he had not noticed. "When I was 15, he said, "my father told me there are men who believe being hard is the same as being strong. It isn't. Stone is hard. Iron is strong. One breaks, the other bends and keeps shape." He adjusted the strap on his shield. "I think if I leave now, I become stone." Mara's mouth twitched. "That is a deeply irritating answer." "I've been told." By nightfall, the west wall was gone. By midnight, Aldren fought in the streets against Varkal's Ember Knights, towering figures sealed in red-black plate, whose swords were forged from compressed heat. Each kill took effort, each block sent shocks up his arms. Smoke coated his tongue. By the time the rebels fell back to the spire, the city was more fire than stone. Mara met him at the first way, with a bundle wrapped in soot-stained cloth. "You're going," she said. He frowned. "I just told you." "You're going because if you stay, you die here, and everything after dies with you. Varkal isn't a conqueror. He's a hound. Someone sent him because someone noticed you." She shoved the bundle into his hands. "There are maps, names, marks of the ways as we know them. Not enough, but more than nothing." Aldren hesitated only once. Come with me." Mara looked back at the burning city, and for the first time since he had met her, her age showed not in her face, but in the weariness behind her eyes. "This is my world," she said. "If it gets one last chance to breathe free, I'll spend what's left of me buying it." Aldren hated that too. Hated the truth of it. He clasped her forearm. "Then live long enough to make it worth the cost." Mara smiled, thin and fierce. "You too, wanderer." The gate roared open as the tower doors gave way below. Aldren stepped into red light just as the first Ember Knights reached the stair. Heat swallowed him. The ember wastes stretched under a sky of falling sparks. Mountains bled lava in the distance. Plains of cracked obsidian were crossed by trenches full of fire. Armies marched everywhere, human, inhuman, and things between, locked in campaigns with no beginning or end. Great brass portals rose from the landscape like broken teeth, each guarded by fortresses and artillery towers. And overhead, chained between floating citadels, hung suns. Not one, 3, each dimmed and brightened in turn like forge coals, pumped by some impossible bellows. Aldren took one look at the horizon and muttered, "Of course." Then something charged him out of the ash storm. It was man-shaped, but boar-headed, carrying an axe broad as a door. Aldren dropped under the first swing, severed a hamstring, and finished it through the throat before the corpse fully understood it was dead. He had no time to recover before a second brute arrived, then a third. The wastes were not a world where anything stopped to ask a name. He survived by movement, by learning quickly, by scavenging. A dead scout provided a water flask and a short recurved bow. A collapsed skiff gave him leather wraps for his damaged shoulder. From the carcass of a war beast, he cut dried muscle and charred it over fissure vents because hunger did not care what world one stood in. He travelled by night when the suns dimmed and armies huddled behind shields of heat. During the day, he watched the routes of patrols and marked the towers, controlling the nearest portal chains. That was when he began to understand what he was becoming. Not monstrous, not yet, but streamlined. Pieces of ordinary thought burned away under necessity. He missed home still, sharply and often, but the constant edge of danger was reshaping him into someone harder to surprise, harder to distract, less interested in complaint. Practicality, once a habit, became instinct. He ate when he could, slept when he must, trusted almost no one, and killed evil as one might chop wood, because the task existed, and delaying it made the next hour worse. Even so, he remained himself in one stubborn regard. He did not leave innocents where he found them, which was why, on the 12th night in the Ember Wastes, he attacked a prison caravan crossing the ash flats beneath one of the portal forts. The prisoners were being hauled in iron cages on wheeled sledges behind fire lizards the size of horses. Some were soldiers, some were civilians. One was a woman in a blue-black coat, unlike any garb Aldren had seen in Fallow. A long coat stitched with silver symbols, practical boots, cropped dark hair, and eyes that missed almost nothing despite one side of her face being crusted with dried blood. When he cut open her cage, she snatched the fallen guard's knife before the door fully swung wide. "Friendly?" she asked. "Usually." "Good enough." She shoved past him and slit the throat of the next warden herself. Her name was Seris Vale. No relation, though the shared surname startled them both for a moment. She came from the Glass Kingdom, a realm where memory could be traded, stolen, copied, and weaponized. She had been taken crossing the ways with something Varkal's armies wanted. "A key?" Aldren asked, as they crouched behind a burning cart, while arrows hissed overhead. Seris tapped the side of her head. "A map, but not on paper. You remember it. I was built to remember." He decided not to ask what that meant until after the fight. Together, they seized the caravan commander's sigil rod and used it to open the lower gate of the nearest portal fort, before its defenders fully realized the caravan had turned into a massacre. The gate beyond led not home, of course, but onward. Aldren looked back once at the ember wastes. He thought of Mara then, and of promises made under falling cities. Then he stepped through, with Seris at his side. Chapter 5. The Glass Kingdom. The Glass Kingdom was beautiful in the way a blade can be beautiful. It glittered. Cities of mirrored towers rose from deserts of white salt. Rivers ran clear as crystal through canyons whose walls reflected the world 100 times over. Even the sky seemed polished, too blue, too deep, like something manufactured rather than born. But everywhere Aldren looked, there were fractures, hairline cracks in walls, shimmering distortions in reflections, faces in glass surfaces that remained a moment too long after their owners had passed. Seris guided him through a dry ravine toward the hidden quarter where, she said, the unbound still kept safe houses. "You've been here before," he asked. "I'm from here." "And you left?" She gave him a flat look. "You're not the only one who dislikes tyrants." It came out over 2 nights beside a salt fire. The Glass Kingdom was ruled by the Archivist Court, a caste of lords and scholars who had learned to harvest memory from the living and store it in mirrored vaults. They could tax memory as one might tax grain. A criminal might lose a year, a debtor the face of his mother. Dissidents vanished into polished halls and returned obedient, hollowed, unsure why they had once believed anything worth dying for. Seris had been one of their retrieval agents, engineered through old rites and surgery to remember with unnatural fidelity. She had seen too much of what was done in the vaults and fled with a stolen mind map of the ways. "Why not use it yourself?" Aldren asked. "Because the map is incomplete." "How incomplete?" She poked the fire with a stick until sparks went spinning. "Enough to kill us if guessed at badly." "Comforting." She looked at him sidelong. "You don't complain much." "It wastes air." "That's not normal." He considered, then shrugged. "Nothing about any of this feels normal." For the first time, she smiled in a way that did not look borrowed from a sharper emotion. They reached the city of Ver at dawn. Its outer walls were transparent crystal through which watchmen moved like ghosts. The hidden quarter lay beneath it, in the maintenance channels between mirror foundations. There they found the Unbound. Rebels, smugglers, escaped record-keepers, and thieves who preserved what memories the court had not yet stolen. Their leader, a round-faced man named Pell, listened to Seris's report while never quite taking his eyes off Aldren. "So this is the one they're whispering about," Pell said at last. "The Black Hound." Aldren's expression did not change. "I beg your pardon?" Seris frowned. "Who's whispering?" "Everyone with ears in the ways," Pell replied. "A warlord fell in fallow. Prison forts burned in the ember wastes. The gate lords say a mortal outsider is cutting a road through the chained worlds. Some think he's a prophecy. Some think he's bait." Aldren disliked both possibilities. "What matters," Pell continued, "is that the court has a shard of the Grand Atlas. With it, you could align a gate beyond local chains, perhaps even to the outer spokes." "Perhaps again," Aldren muttered. Pell spread his hands. "In the ways, certainty is mostly a myth sold by priests and tyrants. The shard was kept in the Mirror Basilica, a temple vault at the city's heart where penitents paid memory tithes beneath the gaze of the archivist court. To reach it, Aldren and Seris would need to cross the city, evade mirrored sentinels that recognized hostile intent, and descend into vaults that could show a person his own past until he walked willingly into a cage. They went that night. The basilica's halls were lined with living reflections. Aldren caught glimpses of himself in them and did not always like what he saw. Not because he looked monstrous. He still looked like a tired knight with scars and a repaired cuirass, and eyes harder than they had been. But because the reflections began to show him other versions. Aldren, leaving Mara at the first gate without looking back. Aldren kneeling before the Bellmaster and accepting power in exchange for a path home. Aldren returning to Ash Hollow, only to find years had passed and no one remained who knew his name. The mirrors were not simply showing memories. They were probing him. Seris caught his arm before he stepped toward one. "Don't bargain with glass," she said quietly. "It always asks for more than it names." They reached the lower vaults by following the rhythm of tithe processions and hiding among mirrored beer carriers. There, beneath the basilica, the court stored not gold, but lives rendered into prisms. Shelves stretched into darkness, each holding faceted memory stones that pulsed faintly with the experiences trapped inside. Aldren paused beside one and saw, in a flash, the perspective of a child running through summer wheat with a dog at her heels. Another stone held a woman's wedding vows. Another, the last view of the sea from a dying sailor's eyes. The cruelty of it sat heavier in him than all the spectacle of demons and lords. To steal a life entire was one evil. To hollow it out and shelve the bright parts for cataloguing felt colder. "Take the Atlas Shard," Seris whispered. "We can't save them all." He knew she was right. He hated that she was right. They found the shard in the lowest chamber, suspended within a frame of silver nerves. It was not a page, but a sliver of black crystal within which stars moved. Seris approached carefully, speaking numbers under her breath. Then the archivist spoke from every mirror in the room. She appeared as a tall woman in layered white glass robes, her face hidden behind a smooth, reflective veil. Her hands, visible within her sleeves, were transparent to the wrist. Inside them drifted fragments of other people's memories, like trapped snow. "Seris," she said, almost fondly. "I wondered when homesickness would make you stupid." "Not homesickness," Seris replied. "Conscience. Those are often confused by the young." Her veiled face turned toward Aldren. "And you, the one who makes all this noise, do you know what waits at the end of the ways?" "No," Aldren said. The archivist inclined her head. "Good. Ignorance has carried men further than wisdom many times." Mirrored sentinels poured into the chamber from hidden doors. The fight unfolded in flashes. Silver blades reflected light, breaking glass. Aldren found the sentinels harder than demons because they adapted. The moment he favored a line of attack, they mirrored it back. He had to become irregular, ugly, improvisational. He smashed mirrored floor panels to blind one with its own refracted light, hurled a candelabrum into another's joints, used a fallen shelf of memory prisms like caltrops. Seris dueled the archivist through layers of mirrorcraft, each trying to overwrite the other's perceptions. Blood ran from Seris's nose and ears. The room bent strangely around them. Aldren broke through the last sentinels and reached the silver frame. The Atlas Shard burned cold when he seized it. In that instant he saw it. The ways. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. A spinning web of worlds, connected by portals, anchors, bells, wounds, and names. Some closed, some dead, some leading inward toward a dark center where a throne pulsed like a heart. Others leading outward toward places unstable and half-lost. And one path, narrow, broken, dangerous, angled away from the chain. Home was not marked, but escape was possible. Then the vision ended. The archivist screamed, more in fury than pain. Seris had shattered her veil, revealing a face made of overlapping reflections from 100 stolen lives. "Gah!" Seris shouted. Aldren hesitated. Of course he did. It cost him. The archivist drove a shard through his thigh and nearly pinned him to the frame. He ripped free, grabbed Seris as she stumbled, and together they fled upward through a collapsing ladder of mirrors, while Pels unbound detonated charges in the upper galleries. They escaped the basilica as the city bells began to ring. Behind them, glass towers cracked open one by one like eggs. Chapter 6. The Mire of Saints. The Atlas Shard gave them direction, not safety. The next gate flung them into rain so heavy it felt like drowning from the outside. The mire of saints was all water, rot, and bells drowned under mud. Dead trees rose from black marshes wrapped in prayer cloths. Half-sunken cathedrals leaned from bogs like exhausted giants. The air teemed with insects that glowed faint green at night and settled on corpses in such numbers that the corpses appeared jeweled from a distance. Here the dead did not stay still. They also did not always stay dead. Seris took a fever from a marsh leech bite 2 days in. Aldren carried her across causeways of bone and sod, while things moved in the water on either side, pacing his progress. He found a chapel roof still above the flood line, and barricaded it for the night with pew timbers, then spent hours boiling swamp water through cloth and rusted silver screen to make it barely fit to drink. When Seris woke, shivering under his cloak, she stared at him for a long time. "What?" he asked. "You could have left me." "Yes." "You keep not doing that." He fed the fire with a strip of lacquered hymnboard. "You say it like it surprises you." "It does." Aldren glanced at the black water beyond the chapel doors. "It surprises me too sometimes." The Mire's ruler was no warlord and no archivist. Here power belonged to the choir of the last flood, a congregation of drowned saints whose bodies lay in reliquaries under the marsh while their voices moved through the water. They guarded a way, hidden beneath the Cathedral of Sighs, a sunken sanctuary whose crypt descended below even the oldest floodline. To reach it, Aldren and Seris took passage on a funeral barge rowed by penitents without tongues. They paid with a memory prism stolen from the Glass Kingdom, one containing the sensation of warm bread and a mother's hands. The ferryman held it to his brow for 3 seconds and wept silently before letting them aboard. At the cathedral, they found pilgrims knee-deep in water, praying to corpses behind glass. The saints within those reliquaries were bloated, pale, and crowned in algae, but their mouths moved in unison, reciting litanies through the flood. "Do not breathe the incense," Seris murmured. Aldren nodded. They descended anyway. The lower crypts were full of kneeling statues whose heads had been replaced with lanterns. Water dripped from arches carved in the shapes of open ribs. At the deepest level they reached a door of stone swollen shut by centuries of flood. Beyond it, according to the Atlas Shard's whispering pulse, lay the gate they needed. Then the choir noticed them. The water in the corridor rose against gravity, climbing the walls in a spiral. Voices emerged from it, hundreds, then thousands, layered until they became nearly one. "Why do you cross what was drowned?" Aldren stepped forward. "To leave? None leave? Then I'll be first." The water face forming before them smiled with many borrowed mouths. "All first men become warnings." The battle in the flooded crypt was unlike the others. No clean swordplay, no stable footing. Drowned bodies swelled from pools and dragged at Aldren's legs. St. Water struck like hammers. Seris used mirrored sigils, scratched in blood and lamp black, to reflect the choir's own song back at itself, buying them seconds at a time. Aldren braced one shoulder under the swollen stone door, while Seris worked the runes in its frame. Bone cracked in his left hand when one drowned saint bit through the gauntlet. He broke its neck against the wall, shoved harder, and felt the door begin to shift. "Almost," Seris gasped. "Define Not now." He grunted something that might have been a laugh in another life. The choir surged. Water filled the corridor to the ceiling. For a moment, Aldren thought of Ash Hollow again, of rain on chapel stone, of bells under the earth. He wondered whether all roads between worlds began with a man going below where he should not. Then the door tore free. Black water exploded through the opening, dragging them into the crypt beyond. Aldren hit the floor, rolled and came up, choking. Seris slammed the door shut behind them with a mirrored seal. The choir's voices faded to an enraged murmur. In the center of the crypt stood a gate made not of light, but of absence, a doorway cut from the world itself, showing only perfect black. "The next one," Seris said between coughing fits, "leads to the Hollow Forge." Aldren frowned. "That doesn't sound promising." "None of them do." He offered her a hand up. They stepped through. Chapter 7. The Hollow Forge. The Hollow Forge was not a world in the ordinary sense. It was an engine. Mountain-sized gears turned through caverns lit by magma veins. Chains thicker than castle towers moved overhead, lifting platforms, cages, crucibles, and entire districts. The ground shuddered constantly with the rhythm of distant impacts. Here, things were made. Armor, demons, weapons, and perhaps even worlds, Aldren thought once he saw enough of the place. At its center hung the crucible moon, a sphere of black metal suspended on chains of fire. Around it clustered foundries and shrines where smith priests hammered living souls into forms useful to their unseen masters. The gate spat Aldren and Seris onto a maintenance gantry above a chasm full of molten slag. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Seris said, "I hate this one." "You've been here too." "I said I hate it. That doesn't require prior visitation." He almost smiled. They moved through the forge, disguised in scavenged robes and masks taken from dead foundry acolytes. The Atlas shard indicated that somewhere within the crucible moon was a lock seal tied directly to the outer spokes of the ways. If opened, it might allow a jump beyond the Black Sovereign's inner chain. "Might," Aldren said. "Might," Seris agreed. They had become used to uncertainty by then, used to sleeping in shifts, used to read in rooms by exits first, used to silence as comfort rather than awkwardness. Aldren trusted Seris in the way one trusts a bridge built during a storm, because crossing was necessary, and because, so far, it had held. At the lower foundries, they discovered why the forge mattered. Not merely as a factory, as a place where captured champions from different worlds were broken down and remade into executioners for the chain. Aldren saw cells full of warriors wearing fragments of armor from realms he did not know, some still sane, some not. Some praying in languages too old or strange for the human tongue. And in the deepest pit he saw one thing that chilled him more than all the rest. A suit of black armor on a rack, unfinished but unmistakably shaped to his frame, forged in anticipation. "Seris," he said softly. She followed his gaze and went very still. "They really do know you're coming." Aldren stared at the armor, the broad shoulders, the scar groove where his own cuirass had been dented at fallow, copied into new metal like a mockery. Hooks for trophies, a helm with no eye slits, only a red vertical seam. "Or they know what they want to make of me," he said. "They should have left at once." Instead, Aldren crossed the pit, seized a forge hammer from its stand, and began smashing the armor apart piece by piece. The first blow bent the breastplate, the second shattered the helm, the third split the rack itself. Alarms began immediately. "Was that necessary?" Seris snapped. "Yes. That is not an answer." "It is to me!" Foundry guardians descended on them, metal saints with furnace chests and crucible hands. Aldren fought like a man insulted. Practical, yes, stoic usually. But there remained in him a core of blunt fury that woke when evil became too intimate. He hacked through joints, used chain winches to drag one guardian into a slag chute, ripped a smelting lance from a wall bracket, and drove it through another's visor until molten light poured from its back. Seris reached the control dais, overlooking the pit, and worked the lock seals with bleeding fingers while sigils crawled up her wrists like frost. "I have the path," she shouted. "The outer spoke exists, but it needs 3 anchors. Meaning? It means whoever built this wanted no one slipping the leash easily." The chamber doors burst inward. Varkal entered. The Lord of the Ember Wastes filled the threshold in red-black armor, crowned by exhaust flues and horned vents, his great blade burning white along the edge. He was larger than any man had a right to be, though not swollen or crude. He moved with the coiled precision of a veteran executioner. "At last," Varkal said. His voice was a forge door opening. "I have crossed worlds for lesser prey." Aldren stepped between him and Seris. "You should have stayed in your desert. And you should have taken the gate when fallow burned." The duel that followed was the hardest of Aldren's life. Varkal was not merely strong, he was disciplined. Every strike aimed to break guard, ruin footing, crush options. Aldren gave ground across catwalks and forge platforms, using terrain, steam vents, hanging chains, anything. Even so, the Demon Lord drove him steadily backward. One blow cracked his shield. Another split his brow open to the bone. A third nearly took his left arm off at the shoulder. But Aldren learned while he fought, as he always had. Varkal favored pressure over pursuit. He expected collapse, not deception. So Aldren gave him collapse. He stumbled intentionally onto a narrow chain bridge spanning the central slag gulf. Varkal advanced, reading weakness. Aldren dropped his ruined shield, switched grip, and let his sword hand sag just enough to invite the killing swing. When it came, he stepped inside the arc. Not away, through. Varkal's blade carved a line of fire across Aldren's ribs, but Aldren had already driven his own sword under the warlord's gorget with both hands and all the weight of the step behind it. The point punched through the backplate. For one suspended second they stood chest to chest, almost like comrades in an embrace. Then Aldren tore the blade sideways. Varkol dropped to one knee, furnace light spilling from the wound. "You are not built for this chain," the warlord said, almost wonderingly. "Neither are you," Aldren replied, and kicked him into the slag below. The molten gulf swallowed the lord of the ember wastes. Behind Aldren, the lock seal opened with a shriek. The Atlas shard blazed, projecting 3 lines of force into the air. 3 anchors needed to reach the outer spoke. One lay already beneath them in the hollow forge. One burned at the edge of the throne between. And the third pulsed from somewhere called the Cathedral of Teeth. Seris stared at the image. "That's close to the center." Aldren wiped blood from his eyes. "Then that's where we're going." Chapter 8. The Cathedral of Teeth. By then they had learned enough of the ways to move almost like veterans, which in that cosmos only meant they were still alive long enough to make newer mistakes. The route to the Cathedral of Teeth ran through lesser wounds, micro-realms, fractured corridors, abandoned sanctuaries between worlds where reality had thinned. They crossed a battlefield frozen in 1 second of impact, where arrows hung motionless in the air around kneeling skeletons. They crossed a moonlit orchard of silver fruit that whispered names in sleeping voices. They crossed a library whose books bit anyone who read the wrong page. All of it pointed inward, toward the Black Sovereign, toward the gravity at the center of the chain. The Cathedral of Teeth stood on an island of bone, suspended above a void filled with stars that were not stars, but eyes opening and closing in the dark. Its towers were made from fused fangs of titanic beasts. Its bells were jawbones. Its doors were gums of petrified flesh. "This place," Seris said, "is offensively symbolic." Aldren nodded. "At least it's honest." Inside, they found the remains of armies. Not fresh, not ancient, timeless perhaps. Armor from 100 worlds lay scattered in the naves. Banners had rotted to threads. Great heroes who had made it this far had died within sight of something important. At the altar stood the 3rd anchor, and beside it waited a man in knight's armor. Aldren stopped so abruptly, Seris nearly collided with him. The stranger wore steel of old make, scarred by use, and carried a plain sword with no ornament. He was broader than Aldren by a little, older by a little more, with grey in his beard, and the posture of someone who had forgotten luxury for so long, he no longer recognized the concept. He looked familiar for no good reason. "Who are you?" Aldren asked. The man regarded him with exhausted calm. "The better question is when." Seris muttered a curse. The knight inclined his head slightly. "I was called Garen once. I was taken from a chapel crypt in the kingdom of Wold 63 years ago, though by your face I suspect not even a year has passed for you since Ash Hollow." Aldren's blood ran cold. "You were sent from my world. Yes, you escaped this far." "No." Garen's mouth twisted. "I was allowed." The cathedral seemed to lean closer around them. Garen explained with the blunt weariness of a man too tired for drama. The Black Sovereign cultivated outsiders from hard worlds, warriors, hunters, knights. The chain was both prison and forge. Some died, some were broken into servants. A rare few were hardened by passage into precisely the kind of weapons the sovereign prized. "And if they refuse?" Aldren asked. Garin lifted his left arm. At first, Aldren thought the gauntlet was merely blackened. Then he realized the metal was fused to flesh. The arm beneath was no longer wholly his. "If they refuse long enough," Garin said, "the chain begins helping." Seris stepped subtly closer to Aldren. "Why tell us this?" "Because I remember enough of myself to hate what comes next." Garin's eyes met Aldren's. "He intends to open the outer spoke himself, not to let you flee, but to follow. There are worlds beyond the chain he has not devoured. He means to use you as the key. An outsider opens what the trapped cannot." Aldren felt as if some piece of every fight behind him had clicked into new and uglier place. The Lords had not been merely trying to kill him. They had been driving him, herding, testing, sharpening. "Then the escape path is a trap," Seris said. "Not exactly," Garin replied. "It is a door. Doors do not choose who crosses them." The cathedral shook. Bone dust drifted from the vaults. "He's coming," Garin said. "Take the anchor and run for the throne between. That is where the final alignment must occur. And if you see a way to kill him—" His sentence ended in a wet metallic sound. A black spear had erupted through his chest from behind. The thing holding it stepped from shadow with no footfall. It wore no fixed shape. Tall, thin, wrapped in robes of moving darkness, with a crown made from broken gate rings, orbiting an absence where a face should be. Within that absence glowed a single, vertical red line. Not the sovereign, a herald. "The master sends invitation," it said. Garin died standing, eyes locked on Aldren's, as if by that gaze alone he could still insist the younger man live better than he had. Aldren ripped the anchor from the altar. The herald attacked. Its spear stretched like night itself. Teeth erupted from the floor. Bells hidden within the cathedral walls began tolling in rhythmic bursts that made thought come apart. Seris hurled mirrored shards that reflected not light but possible positions, forcing the herald to strike ghosts. Aldren used those instants to close. The herald bled shadow and moved like sorrow. Every wound closed unless cut through the red line in its faceless void. Aldren discovered that by accident on the fourth exchange, when a backswing clipped the line and the creature shrieked in several voices at once. "Eyes!" Seris shouted. "It doesn't have—" Another spear, thrust, nearly removed his head. "Fine." They fought upward through the cathedral's collapsing choir lofts toward the gate suspended above the nave. At the final stair, Seris slipped on blood and broken enamel. The herald lunged. Aldren caught the spear in both hands, felt it burning through leather and skin, and held it just long enough for Seris to drive a mirror shard into the red line. The herald exploded into strips of dark that slithered screaming into cracks between the worlds. For several seconds, only the bells remained. Then Seris sagged against a pillar, breathing hard. "We are running out of easy battles." Aldren looked at Garin's body below. "I don't think we ever had any." Chapter 9. The Throne Between. The Throne Between lay outside ordinary geography. There was no land there, Only platforms, bridges, and steps suspended over a void of moving worlds. Gates spun in great wheels around a central citadel blacker than the space around it. Every realm Aldren had crossed seemed visible somewhere below or beyond. Fallow's dead towers, the ember waste's chained suns, the glass kingdom's white deserts, the swamp cathedrals of the mire, the furnaces of the forge, all turning within the same colossal mechanism. At the citadel's summit rose the throne itself, a chair of fused crowns, ribs and gate rings, positioned before a vertical wound in reality through which the outer dark glimmered. Aldren and Seris emerged on a service bridge beneath the citadel, while alarms not meant for human ears rippled across the vastness. The three anchors now pulsed in harmony with the Atlas shard. One more alignment, Seris said, and the outer spoke would open. But he'll come through too, Aldren said. Yes. Can we close it after? Maybe. He gave her a look. She shrugged, tired and unapologetic. I prefer honesty. They climbed through the lower machinery of Empire, vaults full of tribute from dead worlds, barracks for gate wardens, chapels where kneeling lords prayed for permission to continue existing. The scale of it all made clear what the Black Sovereign truly was. Not a king of one world, a predator of systems. He had built an ecology of despair. A machine that converted conquest into mobility, mobility into conquest, suffering into stability. Every bell, every gate, every lord and choir and archivist fed the same center. Aldren had never hated anything so completely. At the penultimate stair they found prisoners in iron blooms, men and women from worlds not yet fully chained, kept alive as tuning forks for unopened gates. Aldren stopped. Seris grabbed his arm. We cannot free them all now. He looked at her, jaw tight. I know. She hesitated, then placed a small glass charge in his hand. On your way back. He understood. They reached the throne hall as the final cycle began. The Black Sovereign sat waiting. He was not giant. That somehow made him worse. He wore the shape of a man because shape was useful. Black robes, black armor beneath, hands bare and long-fingered on the throne's arms, no crown save the orbiting rings of broken gates behind his head. His face was almost human, almost handsome, except for the eyes, each a red aperture opening into impossible depth. He looked at Aldren the way a master smith might look at a blade fresh from quenching. With each realm, said the Sovereign, you improved. Aldren drew his sword. I'm not yours. No, not yet. Seris moved toward the alignment dais at the hall's edge. Instantly, black chains rose from the floor and bound her wrists. She swore with admirable venom. The Sovereign did not even glance at her. You thought these worlds random, he said to Aldren. They were not. Fallow tested pity, Ember tested endurance, Glass tested identity, Mire tested sacrifice, Forge tested fury, all necessary, all ingredients. You could have asked. The Sovereign's mouth curved faintly. Would you have agreed? No, exactly. Then the chains of the throne hall came alive. Aldren ran. He had no clever opening, no speech worth the air. The Sovereign rose in a motion almost lazy, and suddenly the space between them became full of blades, made from compressed dark. Aldren parried one, ducked another, felt a third carve, sparks from his cuirass. He closed anyway. That was his gift, perhaps, the refusal to be impressed by terror. Their first clash shuddered the hall. The sovereign fought with one hand, and still nearly killed him. Every movement was economical, practiced over centuries. Aldren survived because he had learned from many worlds, and because pain no longer disrupted him as it once might have. He fought like a man who had accepted fear as weather, present, unpleasant, irrelevant. He also fought dirty. At the first lock, he stamped the sovereign's instep hard enough to crack the floor beneath both of them. At the second, he threw a pommel strike not to wound, but to break rhythm. At the third, he used his own body as bait, taking a slash across the abdomen in order to drag the fight into range of the alignment dais. "Seris!" he shouted. She had one hand free by then, blood slicking her fingers where she had half flayed her own wrist to slip the chain. She slammed the first anchor into its socket. A gate wheel somewhere outside the hall roared awake. The sovereign's eyes flashed. "No!" For the first time, anger sharpened his voice. Good, Aldren thought. Let him feel hurried. He pressed harder. The sovereign answered by lifting a hand and opening a wound in the air itself. Through it lunged creatures from the lower realms, bell-things, ember-hounds, mirrored executioners, drowned saints, half-formed from black water. Everything Aldren had fought came back in fragments. He met them with grim familiarity. One cut, step cut, shielding Seris, holding space, buying seconds. The practical labor of survival elevated into something nearly sacred by necessity. Second anchor, third. The hall began to crack with white light. Beyond the throne, the wound in reality widened. Aldren glimpsed not another chained realm, but distance. True stars, true dark, the suggestion of freedom vast enough to hurt. The sovereign saw it too, and understood the danger at once. He no longer wanted Aldren as a key. He wanted him dead. Power flooded the hall. The throne behind him unfolded like a great black flower, releasing chains tipped with hooks, blades, and bells. One pierced Aldren's shoulder and nailed him to a pillar. Another wrapped his sword arm. A third caught Seris across the ribs and flung her from the dais. Aldren roared, not theatrically, not nobly, simply because the pain was large and his body required a sound for it. The sovereign advanced, face calm once more. "You might have ruled beside me," he said. Aldren spat blood on the floor. "I don't even like traveling with people." For a heartbeat, actual confusion crossed the tyrant's face. Then Seris, from where she had fallen, began to laugh. It was the wrong sound in the wrong place, and that perhaps was why it mattered. Not hope, not triumph, just human defiance, rude enough to exist in front of a cosmic emperor. The distraction was small. Small was enough. Aldren tore the hook deeper through his own shoulder to get a better angle, seized the chain, pinning his sword arm, and wrapped it once around the pillar. Then he threw his weight forward. The pillar cracked and toppled, dragging the bell chain array sideways. The hall lurched. The sovereign turned. Too late. Seris slammed the Atlas shard into the final socket with both bleeding hands. The outer spoke opened. Light, unlike any in the chained worlds, flooded the hall. Clean light, cold, distant, real. The sovereign screamed, not because it burned him, because it was beyond him. Aldren ripped free of the broken chains, charged through the wash of brightness, and drove his sword into the sovereign's chest, just below the sternum. The tyrant caught his wrist. They stood straining inches apart as worlds thundered outside the citadel. "You will not escape me," the sovereign whispered. Aldren leaned harder on the blade. "Watch me." Then he triggered Pell's glass charge beneath the throne. The explosion was not large. It did not need to be. The charge ruptured the stabilizing matrix under the throne dais, shattering the geometry holding the hall's gate rings in proper relation. The opened outer spoke surged wildly, chains snapped, wheels sheared. Across the vast mechanism of the throne between, portals began to misalign and devour their own anchor points. The sovereign finally looked afraid. Aldren yanked his sword free and ran to Seris. The hall was collapsing around them. "The spoke!" she shouted. "I know!" "No, listen to me!" She shoved the Atlas shard at him. "It's keyed now! To you! If we both jump, it may not hold!" He stared at her. "No. Don't be simple, Aldren. I'm not leaving you." Her expression went painfully soft. "You never do. That's why this works." The floor split between them. Chains screamed. Beyond the widening gap, the clean light of the outer spoke flickered. Seris forced the shard into his hand. "Go," she said, "and if you ever make it home, remember us correctly." Then the gap widened, and she was gone in dust, light, and falling stone before he could reach her. Aldren had no room left in himself for screaming. He ran. Chapter 10. The Last Gate. The outer spoke was not a tunnel, but a storm of possible roads. Aldren hurtled through it with the Atlas shard burning in his hand and the collapse of an empire at his back. Around him spun glimpses. Worlds untouched by the chain, worlds half-eaten, worlds wholly strange, oceans under green moons, cities carved into living crystal, endless plains of snow under twin suns, familiar forests seen as if from childhood height. The spoke bucked violently. Without the throne between to steady it, paths were unraveling. The Atlas shard pulsed one final sequence into his palm. 3 turns, 1 cut, trust momentum. He obeyed, because there was nothing else left to do. Turn, turn, turn. A final cut through the dark with his sword. Then cold rain struck his face. He collapsed on wet grass beneath a grey sky. For several seconds he could not move. He lay on his back, breathing mud and rain, staring up at clouds so ordinary they looked miraculous. No green storms, no false suns, no worlds spinning beyond, just a low autumn sky over rolling hills. A church bell rang in the distance, a small, human sound. He began to laugh and choke at the same time. When at last he stood, he found himself on a ridge above a village road. Carts moved below. Sheep dotted a far field. Smoke rose from a chimney. All of it achingly, impossibly normal, but not familiar. Not exactly. The road signs bore his own language, yet the script had drifted oddly in places. The styles of carts and cloaks below looked newer than those he remembered. When he made his way to the nearest inn by dusk, the innkeeper stared at his armor, his scars, and the black crystal clutched in his fist, then told him he had the look of a relic from an older age. "What year is it?" Aldren asked. The innkeeper named a king Aldren had never heard of, then a number that made the room tilt around him. 82 years. On his world, 82 years had passed. He went very still. The innkeeper, mistaking shock for drunkenness or injury, guided him to a bench and brought broth and coarse bread. Aldren sat with the bowl cooling in his hands and felt the final cruelty settle. Home, but late, No father waiting, no roads remembered by the same feet, no village untouched by time. Ash Hollow, if it still stood, would be generations removed from the night he had vanished. He should have felt only grief. He did feel grief, great, cold, tidal grief. But beneath it there was something else, relief. He had escaped, not intact, not rewarded, not with everyone he had wanted beside him, but he had broken the chain and crossed beyond the Black Empire's grasp. He had returned to a real sky, to bread, to bells rung by human hands. That mattered. Later, when the inn had emptied and rain tapped softly on the shutters, Aldren opened his fist and looked at the Atlas shard. It had gone dim, yet deep within its black depths, very faintly, a light still moved. Not the throne, not the sovereign, a reflection, a memory, or perhaps a surviving path. He thought of Mara on the walls of Fallow, of Pell in the shattered galleries of Vere, of the tongueless ferryman in the mire, of Garin dying in the Cathedral of Teeth with warning in his eyes, of Seris in the collapsing hall, telling him to remember correctly. Aldren closed his hand over the shard. He was home, if home meant the world of his birth. But he had left too much of himself in the chained realms to become merely a farmer or a forgotten veteran with stories no one believed. He knew what lay beyond ordinary rower arms began immediately, Dias now. Knew that evil did not end at borders men could map. Knew also that doors, once opened, rarely stayed shut forever. So he made himself a plain promise in the dim inn light. He would rest. He would learn what remained of this altered age. And if the black paths ever opened again, if any hand reached through from those realms for this world or any other, then he would go back through whatever hellmouth was required, and finish what had begun beneath the ruined chapel at Ash Hollow. Not because he wanted war, not because he had become something that loved killing, but because practical men understood unfinished dangers, because stoic men carried pain without kneeling to it, because courageous men were often just ordinary men who kept moving after better men had fallen, and because somewhere in the dark between worlds, he suspected, others still waited for a gate to open the right way. Outside, the bell rang again. This time it was only a bell. Aldren ate his bread while it sounded through the rain, and let the world, at long last, be ordinary for one quiet hour.